Could the Ravens actually bring back J.K. Dobbins and Dalvin Cook alongside Derrick Henry to help bolster their running back room even further? We talk about that and so much more coming up next here on this episode of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire, with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here and making Locked On Ravens your first listen each and every day. We're free and available on all podcasting platforms. That includes in video form on YouTube and audio form wherever you get your shows. You can subscribe, follow along for 5 days a week Ravens content, plus bonus episodes, live episodes. We got the whole 9 yards here on Locked On Ravens. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. We're back here. It is a Wednesday midweek edition episode, and here with me today is former Baltimore Ravens wide receiver and Super Bowl champion Qadry Ismail. And a lot of Ravens to dive into. We'll talk about running backs, talk about wide receivers, talk about just John Harbaugh's takeaways overall, but obviously, I think I should start off this show. It has to be the Francis Scott Key Bridge tragedy in Baltimore. My thoughts and my prayers out to the entire city, out to all the lives that have been affected and presumed lost at the time of this recording. It's just unimaginable what happened, seeing those videos, seeing those pictures. Really, it's movie-type stuff that you never think you're going to see. And my heart just is with the entire city right now.
Same here. Well said. It's so surreal because you think it is out of some kind of CGI led movie, and tomorrow we're just going to wake up and we're going to have a normal routine as far as the commuters and just what obviously the bridge and the port means to the city, the economy, all of that. So those lives that are presumed lost. I know that those families right now are grieving, and there's nothing we can say that's going to make it any better other than that, we are praying and we are hoping that, they can find some sort of comfort and remember who they were as humans and try to, continue that legacy of what they meant to those respective family members' lives. So our hearts definitely go out. And I pray also just a bigger picture of, the government, federal, local, state can, all come together and necessarily get the red tape in the way, but to start the rebuilding process and not allow this moment to define what Baltimore is in a blight, but rather in a positive light.
Yeah, tragic situation all around, but the city is strong and the city is great. And I'm very confident that the city can rebound from this, but of course, doesn't take away from the tragic events that did occur and the tragic lives presumed lost at this point. But Q, to football, to Baltimore, and kind of talking about the Ravens side of things here. John Harbaugh spoke to the media at the owners' meetings and had a lot of interesting comments. And I think the one that stuck with, well, there were a couple, but I think the one that I want to dive into the most today is about the running back position. Baltimore brought in Derrick Henry. Obviously, he is the bell cow, the number one, the big man on campus at that position. But John Harbaugh talked about J.K. Dobbins and Dalvin Cook a little bit, saying that he'd be happy to have either one of those guys back. Now, obviously, it does come down to circumstance and what the Ravens running back is no longer a need for them anymore. If you were to bring back a Dobbins or a Cook, could be more of a luxury at this point. But we know the player that J.K. Dobbins is when he's healthy, and that's the asterisk, right? When he's healthy. Then for Dalvin, kind of a weird situation in terms of how he was utilized over the playoff run, but he still is, I think, a talented back. Would you be okay with Baltimore bringing back one of J.K. Dobbins or Dalvin Cook? I'm sure it wouldn't cost much, or would you rather them try to spend their resources elsewhere?
It's not that I wouldn't mind them coming back. It's not the, for example, a Dalvin Cook. It's easy for me to see him come back. It's easy for me to see him, be one of the guys and it just be easy to, assimilate into the team. because when he did come in, obviously he got the blessing of Lamar, and that goes a long way, as we now know. But monetarily, you got to know where you're at in the pecking order, and is that something that you're going to be living with? I think for JK, because he is homegrown, it's a little bit different. It's a situation where he felt going into all of this like he was the guy, like, hey, I'm going to be the guy. It doesn't really matter. I know that I'm going to have a great year, contract wise, I'm about to blow this thing up. And unfortunately, he gets the Achilles. So I think for him, it's a psychological difference. And we see that so many times across the board, all positions, with different players in the league. And heck, we saw it with New York and Philly when Saquon Barkley. What's the same thing? Even though, yes, ironically enough, JK plays the same position as Saquon, but that psychological, hey, homegrown type of thing. Man, wow, you don't trust me? Wow, you're not going to give me enough? Wow, you don't think I can play? All those things they just factor in. So I would say, John saying that he wants him back, yeah, that's a good thing. But you could also see where he's like, oh, that's up there. So it's a cool way to, deflect and not necessarily have to get in the middle of looking like the bad guy when it comes to a homegrown talent such as J.K. Dobbins.
Right. And I think in all these press conferences and media availabilities, obviously there is some coach speak and some, GM speak, players speak, whoever's speaking at the podium there to the media. So I don't think that John Harbaugh was necessarily lying about it, but I don't think that there is, a way that I see a JK coming back. I think it's honestly, and this is kind of crazy to say, I've kind of said it throughout the week, Q, but it seems more likely that, to your point, Dalvin comes back as opposed to a JK, because it feels like you can just slot him in easier. Then you have to factor in Keaton too, where if Keaton wasn't in the picture, I could see an argument for bringing JK back, but you have to give Keaton Mitchell snaps. Now, Derrick Henry's your bell cow. That's what's going to shift. We've seen the committees with Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins, Justice Hill, Keaton Mitchell. With Derrick Henry, he is your guy. That's going to be a shift from what the Ravens have gone with. But if Keaton wasn't in the picture, you could see like Derrick Henry being the 1, J.K. being the 2, Justice Hill being the 3. But with Keaton Mitchell, it's almost like, well, yeah, Derrick Henry's the 1, then Keaton's the 2 when he comes back. And Justice Hill is kind of the third down-ish type player. So when Keaton comes back, JK or Dalvin, if they're back, have to slide into essentially the 4th running back role. I think it's easier to give Dalvin that role than JK, just based off of everything you said and everything you mentioned.
Yeah, I think that's where you see guys who, again, not that I was in a negative injury position of JK, but yeah, I felt like, man, my contract is up with the Vikings. I was there for 4 years. This would be, my free agent period. It was in the infancy of free agency, so nowhere near like it is today. But still, the qualifying offer, once I was past the first few rounds of free agency, it was like, well, Qadry isn't signed yet. We'll bring him back. And I was like, yeah, no, I'm not going to go back, because I know just what you said, as far as kind of like that pecking order, I'm never really going to like spread my wings and be the guy. And, I'm setting myself up leverage wise for failure. I think JK, really has something to prove, and he's not going to be able to prove it, kind of getting in some weak rotational minutes. And I humbly say that, weak rotational minutes. I think Keaton isn't going to be ready for training camp. They're not going to really push him to go to training camp. So, yeah, it's going to be Justice Hill. It's going to be Derrick Henry. It's going to be a couple of undrafted rookie free agents that are going to be toting the rock. And, if I'm JK, I'm like, man, let me go somewhere where I can it feels, there's a feeling of like, yeah, we want you. And not only do we want you, we're going to give you carries early so you can get into your groove early.
Right. You and I are on the same wavelength for this entire show so far, because that was exactly what I was going to mention, is the point that if you're J.K. Dobbins and you have an opportunity, let's just say Dallas is a team, for example, because they don't really have a running back right now. You can go to Dallas on a 1-year prove-it deal, new situation. There are minutes, as you said there. There are key quality minutes, snaps for you there. Or if you come back to Baltimore, I mean, where are you getting your opportunities? Because Derrick Henry's taken a ton of them. Justice Hill's going to get his. When Keaton comes back, he's getting his. You are essentially probably going to be the fourth running back. And that's no disrespect to JK and his talent, because I don't think JK Dobbins is a fourth back on a team when he's healthy. He's a talented player. He deserves to go somewhere where he's going to get those snaps. But in Baltimore, we can be realistic about it, Q. That's just not going to happen because of how they've built that room. Sure, you can argue early in the season he'd get them. But once Keaton comes back, you have a really weird kind of rotation behind the bell cow in Derrick Henry. And it would just, I think, get a little dicey. So I think for JK, if he's looking for opportunity, it's not in Baltimore. I think it's easier to sell Dalvin Cook on the idea that, hey, we still think you're a talented player. We still think you can contribute. Keaton's coming back early, and then once he comes back, we can kind of figure out your role from there. I don't think you're going to be able to sell JK on that, because this essentially is a make or break year for him with all that he's done injury-wise. He has to be able to prove he can stay healthy for a season, because we know that when he's healthy, he's one of the better backs in this league, but unfortunately, it just hasn't been that way for him.
Well, I appreciate the fact that his doctor cleared him with, glowing endorsement. I know that he's going to have to go out there and show some people, but at the same time, bigger picture is, you're right. He is a legit bona fide bell cow type back. He can carry the team. And in this day and age, you don't necessarily have to be just a one back, although Pacheco for Kansas City is an outlier per se. But for the most part, a J.K. Dobbins, he would be a great find for any team looking Dallas for a running back.
1-year prove a deal in Dallas. I called that the second day of free agency when everything was kind of going crazy.
I remember you did.
I said Derrick Henry to the Ravens, Joe Mixon to the Texans, Aaron Jones to the Vikings, and J.K. Dobbins to the Cowboys. I need that last infinity stone in there, Q. I need the JK to the Cowboys, so I can post that clip and say I am the seeing all being of NFL free agency. But yeah, to Q's point there, thank you for bringing it up, Q. I almost forgot to mention it. The reason we're talking about running backs today is because there was news both on JK and on Dalvin Cook. So Q mentioned it right there. JK was cleared for football activities from his doctor wrote, and then there's a doctor that wrote in the letter to teams today, select teams actually, noting that Dobbins looks outstanding coming off of the torn Achilles. Then for Dalvin Cook, there is rumored interest from the Cowboys potentially, who, as we mentioned in the show, currently do not have a running back after losing Tony Pollard to the Tennessee Titans. And to not sign Derrick Henry, where it seemed like that could have been a fit, but Baltimore gets to reap the rewards of that one. Coming up, though, we flipping gears, not moving away from offense, but moving positions, talking wide receivers, which Q seems to know a thing or two about. So be sure to stay tuned. We got plenty to talk about on Locked On Ravens. First, this show is brought to you by FanDuel. Say goodbye to busted brackets, because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tourney, whether you're betting on a big upset or a one seed. It's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who's going to win it all. I have UConn. If you're tuned in with me on Locked On Ravens before, you've heard my pick last year. I picked Purdue, going a little better for me this year as opposed to last year. But my bracket still is all types of busted. I had BYU in the Elite Eight. I had Kentucky going far. So, look, as long as my Final Four in it, which they are, I have a chance, but I've definitely lost some points along the way. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. We're back our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still here with Qadry Ismail, talking about John Harbaugh's comments to the media during the NFL owners' meetings. We talked about the running back position and how John Harbaugh said he'd be happy to have one of J.K. Dobbins or Dalvin Cook back and what that all meant. But Q, John Harbaugh also mentioned the wide receivers, and we saw Odell Beckham Jr. essentially pen a farewell to the Ravens in the city of Baltimore last week. Hasn't felt very likely he's going to be back in Baltimore, and I think that essentially all but sealed it. And John Harbaugh's comments to the media all but sealed that again, saying he loves Odell, but he's excited to give the younger wide receivers a shot. Now, to me, this comment coupled with the wide receiver visits, which we'll get into more specifically in a couple minutes, but you see Michael Gallup come in, you see Josh Reynolds come in. It feels like Baltimore is setting up for Rashad Bateman to be their number 2 wide receiver and not necessarily going the route of trading for an established veteran. a la a Cortland Sutton type of player. Is that the right move in your opinion, Q, or would you like to see them go after a more established player that is maybe a bit better than a Gallup or Reynolds at this point?
I think what I saw all of last year with Rashad Bateman, you'd be a fool to let him go. It's funny when you sit in the press and you see the way in which he separates from the line of scrimmage at home, and then obviously on television you get a chance to see the replay, and you're like, oh, you're constantly saying like, oh, as in homeboy was open. Now, I don't know if he was psychologically in the doghouse with Lamar after the Pittsburgh game. Everyone was dropping the ball, but it just didn't seem like he got back to Bate after that Pittsburgh game. Like, I felt if he were in that Steelers game producing, getting that hardcore, what was it, like a back shoulder throw, then getting that hardcore back of the end zone touchdown, man, I just think he would have went back to him more. It just seemed like some of the deep balls, there are different numbers to indicate the level. So like a level 3 type of a throw, which is a little more arcing compared to level 2, which is a little more of a driving action. In my mind, like, I get it as far as, there's nothing there. That's my guy and all that. But yeah, I've been a receiver, and psychologically, man, there's something there to be said, So I like it that they are going with other more veteran-y type players, not necessarily guys that would quote unquote threaten him. I think that he is a clear and away starter who absolutely, if you feature him, he could take over a game. And I always reference back. I mean, since we've been doing our show, I always reference back to the Browns game where he lit it up, and it was man to man, and they had some good corners, and it didn't matter. And I think he's gotten way better since then.
Yeah, I think, to me too, he's a guy where we've seen the separation, we've seen him win, but I do think that injuries have kind of sapped a lot, not of his skill, but of just time to get a connection with Lamar.
Yeah.
Especially when you start, his rookie season, comes in, suffers the injury in camp, and doesn't come. I think it was week 6, Q, if I'm not mistaken. That Chargers game was his debut.
Yeah.
And then, again, he was kind of behind the 8 ball, suffered a couple other injuries, has had to miss some time. And so he hasn't really had the luxury of like a consistent, like full off season, then going into the beginning of the year, having that full beginning of the year as well to establish game reps. 2 has kind of been a little chunk here and then a little chunk there, then a medium chunk, then a long chunk, then another one. So hopefully with a full off season and a full season in an established role where he's not necessarily looking behind his shoulder. Because I think too, do you think that there was anything with Odell being there, Q, with him and Bateman? Zay took that receiver 1 position and didn't let it go. We can kind of throw that out the window. But then with Bateman and Odell, it was kind of like, well, who's the 2? Who's the 3? Do you think it's a better situation if they bring in a Gallup or a Reynolds who, again, is not meant to necessarily take over the 2 job from Bateman, is to complement him, and Flowers is the 3 or 4?
Here's a situation that you face. It's called money. I got to answer to somebody. I got to answer to Steve Bisciotti. And yeah, you, the head coach, you got to answer to me. So technically, if Steve is saying, how come you brought in a $16 million guy, and then how come, hey, you, head coach, didn't use a $16 million guy? Somebody got to answer for that. I think when you see how Todd Monken's offense wasn't quite polished, and I don't say that as a negative, it just wasn't, it was new. It was, guys are trying to get used to it. It was a little bit easier to get to Odell, but at the same time, you can also read between the lines. There were times where he wasn't on the same page, and so they kind of set him back. Then they put in Bate. Like I said, I felt he was on the same page. It's just that he wasn't, whether it be, like I said, Steeler game where there's drops, we get it. But outside of that, from a deep ball aspect of things, like they purposely went like, we're going to feature you right off the bat. Run up on homeboy's toes, run by him, let's go. And it was a couple times. And he just couldn't get it done. And he you don't need to be a former wide receiver to see he was open. Just didn't get it done. You don't need to be a former wide receiver, especially when you're watching it at home on your little flat screens and all that, or in a bar and like, oh, wow. I saw it up in the press, and I'm like, mother of pearl, homeboy is open and like creating separation. And they just didn't, Todd purposely, you say Zay was receiver one. Well, Todd purposely gave him those bubble screens. Todd gave him those receiver screens. Todd was giving them that opportunity to come in and do the RPOs. It wasn't, just, he went up there and he snatched it a la, I don't know, you name a guy who was a young player, maybe a Randy Moss. There's some other guys, recent guys that, you saw it. I'm not saying that I don't see it with Zay Flowers. I do. But I think in my mind, I see Zay, I see Bate, they're kind of like this 1 and 1A just by the way Todd's offense runs. Like, get the ball out to Zay quick and let him, do some things. But you're also seeing, Rashad like making some strong moves, intermediate and deep. Like, okay, you got yourselves like a tandem that you can work with. And so I think that's important. I think that's something that, shouldn't be lost on the masses. The ill-informed, they're going to just speed bump over our comments, and that's fine. But I think those that really know, they're like, Rashad's valid.
Yeah, I think if Bateman and Flowers can become a 1A, 1B duo, and that's where they go next year, everybody in Baltimore, every Ravens fan is going to be jumping for joy. So that there's potential with Bateman, but then you also see, and also obviously Flowers as well. Don't want to, jump over that. But you see Josh Reynolds come in queue. You see Michael Gallup come in, two receivers who, again, would be more wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4s in this offense as opposed to number 2. Now, Gallup, and this is the type of player the Ravens want, I feel like, is they have the route runners, the speedy guys-ish, but Gallup and Reynolds are bigger bodies, contested ball catchers. That's kind of the skill set that they need right now. Now, Gallup had the injury, the torn ACL at the end of 2022, hasn't necessarily regained his form since that. Reynolds, in the meantime, I think he's a good worker over the middle of the field, did have a rough NFC Championship game. He dropped 2 key passes there. But I think that Reynolds is more Raven ready than a Gallup right now. I don't think either would be bad, but how do you view that type of style, Q? Do you feel like the Ravens are taking the right approach by bringing in those types of players?
Yeah, it's interesting with Gallup. I think you say Raven type of player ready now. It feels like when you come from Dallas, there is the circus that is the Cowboys. And you're not as blue-collary as Baltimore, kind of like, we going to hit you in the mouth type of a football game. So that's where I feel like, Reynolds coming from Detroit, bruh, his whole groove up there, with Dan Campbell and company was like hardcore. So, yeah, that's kind of like how I feel with it. I don't necessarily think one guy just, outside of that, like football wise, I like Gallup. I like how he makes plays. I've seen him make some, some really, spectacular plays. But I like your analysis of Reynolds, and yeah, he had a tough, championship game, but I think he could play, and I wouldn't be mad at them either way. But yeah, if I had to slant a little bit, it would slant towards Reynolds.
Right. I expect them to bring in one veteran and then draft a guy. And again, who knows who they draft, who knows who they sign, but it feels like that's probably who they're going to end up trying to pair with Flowers and Bateman and Aguilar and Wallace, who are also on the roster right now. Coming up, though, we're going to be talking more about John Harbaugh's general takeaways, edge, offensive line, a lot more to get to here on Locked On Ravens. First, the show is brought to you by Gametime. I've had plenty of frustrating ticket buying experiences in my life. Sometimes I wasn't sure if the seats were good. Other times I couldn't find last-minute tickets. Sometimes there were just no good deals at all. But you shouldn't have to worry when you're buying tickets to your next big event because Gametime is a fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. With good last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and the best price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. In the Baltimore area, we got opening day coming up, as the Orioles are slated to play the Los Angeles Angels. Not sure if it's going to be Thursday or Friday at the time of this recording, but Camden Yards should be buzzing. Plus, there are plenty of concerts in the Baltimore area as well. Gametime on the app has views from all the seats in the venue. Plus, Gametime is only taking the app that gives you complete peace of mind with the purchase. You can buy tickets in seconds with 2 taps, and they're obsessed with finding ways to help you save money on your tickets. With zone deals, you pick the section, and Gametime picks seats for big time savings. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Down the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply again. Create an account, redeem code LOCKEDON, spelled LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guarantee. We are back rounding out Locked On Ravens with Qadry Ismail. I am Kevin Ostreicher. John Harbaugh, Q. We talked about running back, talk about wide receiver. Let's stick with the offensive side of the ball first, then we'll move into defense. So offensive line, John Harbaugh said that one, Andrew Voorhees is going to be in competition for that one of those guard spots, and he is healthy right now. Daniel Falele is going to have a shot at the right tackle position. Also, he did say saner heads prevailed again. Pastor Ricard not going to be playing offensive line for the Ravens this year. Seems like that agenda comes out every offseason, and again, shouldn't be happening, and I'm glad it's not. Ricard is just fine where he is, and he's a great player for him. But John Harbaugh has referenced, the offensive line rebuild and bringing guys in and figuring it out. The Ravens, they trade Morgan Moses to the Jets. They lose Kevin Zeitler to the Lions, and John Simpson goes with Moses to the Jets in a free agent move there. It's going to be a very different offensive line. How do you envision them doing this? Because they have a lot of quality options internally, like Falele and Voorhees, Ben Cleveland and Saleh, and even McCary, if you want to throw him in there. But then you look at this tackle class, Q, and there are like 7 to 8 guys who are first-round prospects you could argue would be taken in the first round. Feels like they could be looking at a multi-lineman draft where they could spend a high-up pick, but I wouldn't anticipate 3 rookies to be starting. I think that at least one of these spots is going to go to a guy who's been on the roster, maybe a la a Ben Powers or a John Simpson, and they kind of work their way into that role and hopefully perform well.
Hey, man, what if we look at Ben Cleveland? I mean, he played that rotation that they had last year. It was interesting. It worked. It was good. They got the number 1 seed. The offense was number 1 rush offense. So it wasn't like they were sitting there like, oh God, we're rotating and let's cross our fingers and hope. I think that they were really good. So the game experience is critical. Faalele, I think, it's just a matter of his body getting better, movement shape. I think Voorhees, it's, him and between the ears, because you already have a calendar year where were you mentally in it in the meeting rooms and locked in and doing, it's kind of like your rehab and stuff, but also locked in. When it comes to, McCary, like that's our guy. So, we ain't worried about him. But I think the mindset of drafting a guy, I don't know if it is I guess, according to Jonathan Ogden, and I leaned heavily on his word, it's easier to play right tackle than it is to play left. And you can kind of come in and play that spot. So it is a situation where agent-wise, I know if you draft a left tackle type of a player and put him over at the right side, it would be like, oh no, we ain't doing that, because if then you're losing out on future earnings. So it's delicate. It's this fine line of who is out there when our pick comes. I know that Ozzie has been such a huge influence on Eric Costa, and Eric is all about the board. Once the board is set, let the board fall. Let the board. It's the board. Hey, you got a board? We got a board. I got a board. Got a board? Hey, look at the board. The board says we got to do the board. Look at the board. So who knows what the board's going to be as far as Ravens, but I do believe that they have a good, mindset that if in fact it is a tackle, if it's a lineman, they pick him. They definitely will pick him.
I don't think I've heard Board said that amount of times in that short of a span ever. But you know who the Ravens signed last week, Q? Chris Board.
There it is.
Another board to add to the boards. So yes, Eric DeCosta does like kind of going off of what his board says. And we're going to see. But the one thing, Q, and I've said this before, the one thing I think the Ravens can't afford is for them to take a tackle in the first round and then have the guy sit for a year. I just think that the guy, whoever it is, doesn't matter who, has to be ready to play, because first rounders, especially with the way the Ravens have Lamar on his rookie, well, not on his rookie deal anymore. He's on his second contract, but gone are the days of the rookie deal. Now it's the second contract. And I'm not saying the Ravens are completely tied down. They can't do anything, but the importance of hitting on your draft picks is even more so when a quarterback does get signed to a big contract like that. So, I mean, I get the importance of developing, but I don't think the Ravens are in a position where they can literally say, okay, we're going to start Daniel Falele and then not kick the tackle into guard, or we're going to keep this guy for a year behind Ronnie Stanley. They need their guys to contribute now. And again, you can draft developmental guys later. For this team right now, it's all about window. The Ravens window is now. So we're going to see. But speaking of that, moving over to defense, the edge position is a little bit of a worry for some people, Q, right now, just based off how it's laid out. Odafe Owe, we saw flashes from him. I thought he was solid last year. But then outside of Owe, I mean, you're really looking at some very risky potential. Now, it's not that they don't have it. Obviously, David Ojabo has potential, but the 2 years he's been in the league, obviously the one was cut short by his Achilles injury at his pro day. The other one was a torn ACL. Tavius Robinson played more than I thought he was going to, but still, that's a lot of potential, not a lot of provenness there. Malik Ham's also on the roster. There is the possibility that both Jadeveon Clowney and Kavin, or at least one of them, does return to the fold. John Harbaugh said he's been in contact with them, been texting periodically. Kavin revealed on social media that he has been in contact with Eric DeCosta. But John Harbaugh's expecting a full David Ojabo breakout. But as I've said, you can't really put all your eggs in that basket. How nervous are you right now about the edge position as it is, and how much would a Clowney or a Van Noy alleviate some of that worry for you?
Honestly, I think Van Noy and the Clowney is wait till, training camp is damn near over, because they don't want to come in and get their legs ruined. However, it's about money, and you better sweeten it up, fatten it up, make it look good. It's a moot point if, in fact, David Ojabo is David Ojabo, like what they see in potential and all that. I think, Odafe Owe, it's time to say he is legit. And with all due respect to those on the outside that are looking for sack numbers, like, he affected the game, and I loved his play. Like, he was pressuring, he was getting there. There were a ton of calls where it should have been a flag. And that means that you're getting around the guy and his technique can't hold up, and now you're getting a tug at a jersey. And I promise you, they look at all that. So if you want to just be myopic and look at sack numbers, got a point. But if you want to look at the bigger picture against the run, his assignment, his techniques, and all that, homeboy was on point. And that's where I think, you got to give him his due, and don't just be so sack number oriented as far as last year. Previous years, I get it. It didn't really show. But last year, and I think another year with the sack master, Chuck Smith, coaching him up, bruh. Yeah, I think he's going to be just fine.
Right. Sack numbers are important, but they are far from everything. I 100% agree with you, where you have to look at pressure numbers and win rates and everything that comes with it. So Owe hasn't reached that full breakout yet. I mean, we could see it. If Owe and Ojabo were to break out together, plus you have maybe one of Van Noy and Clowney back, that to me, I think, is almost like a perfect edge room for you. And then you can maybe kick Clowney inside on some downs. But for Owe, hopefully a full breakout is coming. We've seen that potential. We know Ojabo has it. I think for those two guys, it's going to be really important for them to have a strong year this year. But Q, I appreciate you hopping on. Thank you so much for joining me, talking some Ravens as always. Please tell people where they can find you and what you're working on.
So it's all about missile training, and missile training is missiletraining.com, where you can get more information on my programming. It doesn't matter the age, doesn't matter the sport, doesn't matter if you're trying to get back into shape, doesn't matter if you're just a casual weekend person, you're just trying to make sure you don't get injured and get that dreaded Achilles or ACL, because we could help you with all those things with the missile training protocols. Missiletraining.com. WJZ is where you can find me on the television, and you can see me, myself, and Mark Viviano. We're doing a lot as far as off season. We got our Purple Playbook. You'll see me on there from time to time, and obviously, we're here on the Locked On Ravens with my guy Kevin Ostreicher. What up?
Always appreciate you, Q. That's right. Q comes on. He's a weekly guest. So if you enjoy Q's commentary, and why wouldn't you, be sure to follow him on social media as well. You see it at the bottom there if you're on YouTube at I am Qadry Ismail. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at ChaosStriker34 as well. And all the links to Q's work will be in the description down below. Q, appreciate you as always. Thank you so much again. And thank you for tuning in to Locked On Ravens. Be sure to subscribe, follow along, video form, audio form, 4 or 5 days a week, plus more of daily Ravens coverage. Coming up tomorrow, of course, it's more daily Ravens coverage here on Locked On Ravens. So be sure to stay tuned. I'll see you right back here on Locked On Ravens tomorrow.